two old friends and simple plans. Callahan placed his hand on the rough trunk and looked in front of him, barely able to see more than a few trees in front of him as the dense woods and heavy night surrounded him in every direction. You don't need to know where you are, only where you're going, he explained. Pick one tree, the farthest one you can see, and go to it. Lost? The voice inside his head asked in a low tone. A wanderer is never lost. Even in the depths of night, there's always something to track. He paused for a moment, placing his hand on yet another tree, and looked up. Sometimes you can glimpse the sky and use the stars to guide yourself. He spun in place and shifted his view, finally pointing at a fixed flickering light. There, that bright glow, the South Sigil, largest star in the sky. When you can spot it, take note of its position. If it drifts to our back, we're walking the wrong way. One home, the darkness remarked shortly after. One what? Star. Polavan. Red. The shadows paused, blending into the ground slightly. Dremet. There's a single star on Polavan? Our world? Dremet? Dremet. Only gate. Callahan looked up at the night sky once more, now barely making it out through the canopy. So all of that, are they gates to other worlds? The shadows stood still, silent and patient. Callahan felt them almost calm, then finally an answer. I do not know. He continued the journey through the dark, making sure to place his palm on every tree he passed. A few more times he looked at the sky, where the trees afforded such a view, taking note of the star's position. Other times he crouched and looked to the ground. Water? The shadows asked, curious about the gesture. The wanderer smiled and let out a small chuckle. No, if there were water, we'd hear it first. The river reach is aptly named though, there's flowing water everywhere. I'm just trying to listen carefully for other clues. A moment passed in silence, then finally the shadows replied. Birds. Yes, Morgan, he said proudly. Birds, more specifically gulls. Mainly found near bodies of water, opportunistic and adaptable. The town we're going towards, Inswink, has a small lake. We follow the birds, we find the town. He stood up and picked another tree in the direction of the sound. And then he followed it. And another, until finally, after an entire night in the dense forest, just as the sun cast its first rays on the ground, the distant outline of a town appeared in the distance. Surrounded by stone walls on every side, with two converging streams flowing into a lake, gently hugging one side of it. Callahan made his way forward and was immediately greeted by familiar sounds. The bells of morning, the bustle of people leaving their homes, shields and swords clacking as guardsmen readied their patrols. Inswink is a large town, Callahan mentioned as he drew closer to the stone walls. There's two main trade routes that pass through it. Hundreds of people call it home. Hide, Morrigan said, not allowing Callahan to finish his thought. Yes, it would be best if you did. Too many witnesses, we can't risk anything. Whatever happens, do not come out. Morrigan's will clashed against Callahan's, pressing tightly. Though she did not struggle. She simply went silent and cold, a subtle sign that she understood. Now the wanderer was left with just the faint presence of the shadows in his mind. He reached into the depths of it, where his travel companions spent most of her time while in civilized places. We're less than a week away from reaching Solaris now, he thought. We'll be safe soon. The stone walls drew closer until Callahan finally reached the main gate of Inswink. Wide streets and cobbled alleys opened beyond it, lined with shops and stalls already in full motion. Residents hurried back and forth, some towards the temple, a simple stone building just visible between uneven rooftops. Others crossing the large open square towards the town hall, large, imposing, and built of brick. Merchants were already set up, shouting over each other, announcing the first deals of the day. Callahan took a breath and stepped through the gate. He moved past the much too enthusiastic merchants and into the main street, crossing in front of the town hall. Curiosity pulled him in for just a moment longer than he intended. He paused, admiring the detailed stonework. For a moment, he felt taken back to his home of Solaris, where such buildings were as common as trees in the forest. He lingered for that moment, just one moment too long. A heavy hand landed on his shoulder and yanked him back with force. His instinct reacted before thought, hand already half opened on the hilt of his blade. He threw his head back and noticed the dark-skinned man that pulled him, his eyes somewhere far above his own. But Callahan recognized that smile immediately. Warm, large, and irritatingly charming. "Federik!" "Callahan Bloody the Caris," the man replied, grinning from ear to ear. Tension broke instantly. Callahan extended a hand, but Federik swatted it away and pulled the wanderer straight into an embrace instead. "Where in the 12 have you been?" Frederick asked, still holding him tight, his body almost entirely covering his. Callahan struggled free after a moment and fixed his coat. He didn't answer immediately. He just shook his head. "I forgot you did that," he said, straightening his back. Frederick laughed. "Do what? Hug my brothers? Show excitement? I find it rather normal, especially when I see my favorite one." He stepped forward again, arms open, ready to cover the wanderer once more. "That's quite enough, Frederick," Callahan said, pushing him aside just enough to avoid a second embrace. "This is highly inappropriate for two men of the road. We're professionals, for God's sakes. We must maintain our decorum and composure." He stopped, then burst out in laughter, loudly. "I'm sorry, I couldn't even finish that," he said, opening his arms. "Come here, you big lug." Frederick jumped at the invitation, squeezed the air out of him a second time, then hooked an arm around his neck. "You've got some explaining to do, Cal," he said, nodding towards a tavern across the street. "We all agreed to stay in touch. No one's heard from you in almost a year." Callahan shrugged as they walked. "Well, brother, do I have a story for you." The two wanderers crossed the street, both smiling wide at the chance reunion. Callahan entered the tavern first, swinging the doors wide. He sat down on the first empty chair he saw. Frederick followed, the frame of the entrance somehow shrinking as he ducked under it. He pulled up a chair beside his brother and sat down. The wood creaked as he fiddled himself comfortably in it. Frederick signaled the bartender, who gave a quiet nod back. "You've been here for some time, I take it," Callahan said, noticing the gesture. Frederick smiled, looking around the surprisingly busy for this early hour tavern. "A couple of months, plenty of work here, plenty of stones to be made." "So you've given up the road? Journey's over?" "More like the road's given up on me, brother. Every journey eventually reaches a destination. And if you recall the last time we crossed paths, I was in a bit of a bind." "A bit?" Callahan said mockingly, trailing off as the bartender arrived with the drinks. When the man left, Callahan raised his mug. "To being in a bind, but at least in good company." Frederick copied the gesture, then took a large sip. "Now what about you, Cal? Are you going to tell me, or should I just come out and say it?" Callahan's eyes dropped to the floor. He had been scolded by Frederick before, but had the feeling this was going to be a big one. "I understand. Then let me tell you what I've heard. Rumors say someone went all the way to the western capital of Earthgame and stole the Bloodblade." Callahan lifted his gaze slightly, the subtle hint of a smile tracing his lips. "Now, I thought to myself, who would be stupid enough to do that? And for some unexplained reason that isn't at all based on past experience, your name popped into my mind. In my defense, I had a plan," Callahan quickly added. Frederick did not react. "A stupid plan, most likely, yes." He took another sip. "But then I heard that the Grand Council of Earthgame is holding its annual First Words Festival unhindered. They wouldn't do that if something as important as the Bloodblade went missing. So it means that either the rumors were false, or the thief got caught." "They were false. Shut up, I'm not done," he chuckled. "A few months ago, I happened to pass by a wanted notice. Your name stood out immediately. Wanted for escaping holding in the Western Kingdom. Am I close?" Callahan didn't answer. His previous grin now faded to nothing, unsure about how his brother would react. "And through all of that, you're somehow now here. Even worse," Frederick dropped his tone lower, barely to a whisper, "you're wearing a goddamn artifact strapped to your neck." Callahan grabbed the amulet on his necklace and hid it in his palm, almost ashamed of it. "I'm in trouble, Frederick. I need to get to Solaris. I need to get Malus to help me with something. Federik leaned back in his chair, the wood screaming beneath his weight, and let the air sit for a moment. Fuck, Cal. Malus? How long has it been since you've talked to her? Years, he answered plainly. Do you know if she's still there? Federik nodded slowly. She's there. Has some pull with their Grand Council, last I heard. Haven't heard from her in a while, though. He took another drink. So what kind of trouble are you in? Callahan shook his head, unwilling to answer. Worse than being wanted by the entire Western Kingdom? Substantially worse, he added. I just need to somehow get to Solaris. Well, how did you get here in the first place? I walked. Federik smiled. So walk your troubled ass to Solaris and apologize to Malus. I can't, Callahan replied quickly. The only viable way to Solaris from here is through Karan, and there's a massive checkpoint there. I need a way to be smuggled in. Can't exactly go around either. With all of the rivers, bridges, and patrols around Solaris, it will take weeks. So you're here on business? Federik asked with a curious tone. I am, yes. I've been doing a few odd jobs here and there, trying to put together enough stones to maybe bribe someone to take me across. Though most of my contacts have gone silent, probably drafted into the war, or they don't want to do business with a wanderer that went missing for a year and is now a wanted man. Who can say which is true? Callahan smiled and raised his glass again. Idiot, Frederick replied and copied the gesture. He sighed and placed his face in his palms. I got this job, a mage hunt. Nasty bastard. Bounty is 100 stones, all cut. Help me get him and they're yours. Should be enough to pay someone off. Callahan's face lit up. Just like that? Oh, you'll pay me back, Wanderer. Don't worry about that, he said with a large smile. Next time I pass through Solaris, I'm coming to collect my due. With interest, mind you. Callahan extended a hand toward his brother. Deal then. The Guild brothers took a bit of time finishing their drinks. They shared a few stories of what troubles they managed to get themselves in the past few years. Federik talked about a group of painters that were being blackmailed and how he solved the situation over a drinking game. He recalled how he managed to get his hands on the only artifact he had in his possession, a tiny metal rod fixed to his earring. Some Hemovari decided to make Inswink the target of their less than noble activities, and after managing to run them out, Federik found the rod in their home. He explained how it was a mere trifle. It allowed him to see in the dark, yet it proved useful at times. Callahan also noted how he too managed to find his amulet by pure coincidence, though he made it clear that he was afraid of using it. The amulet was able to take the user home using a short incantation. Yet, as a homeless wanderer, he wasn't sure exactly where home would be. He recalled bandit raids, a Mascari woman in a mostly deserted town, and how in the last year he had traveled across Dremet on foot, avoiding roads and large settlements. Federik asked why he finally decided to enter a large town then. His brother's answers showed the same practicality he had come to expect. The further he got from the Western Kingdom, the less influence they had. Now that he was almost to Solaris, very few people actually cared that he was wanted. Federik finished his drink and explained how he was on his way to meeting an informant in the mage hunt he was working. He urged Callahan to down the last of his mug and get back on the trail. Federik opened his pouch and placed a handful of stones on the table. The gesture was long enough that Callahan managed to sneak a peek. That's a lot of stones, Federik, he remarked, trying to remember when was the last time he even needed a separate pouch for his stones. I told you, there's a lot of work here. Most of them pay cut. Federik took out one of the stones from his pouch. Red, shiny, and perfectly spherical, cut to precision, just as he mentioned. He handed it to Callahan. Here, some seed money, my financially troubled brother. Callahan shook his head at the thinly veiled insult, but grabbed the shiny gem from Federik's hand without hesitation. He examined the stone for a moment, then pocketed it. Only 99 more to go now. Federik smiled and gestured Callahan out. Come on, I'll brief you on the way. The two wanderers went back into the busy streets of Inswink, where the daily toils were still in full swing. Federik patted Callahan's shoulder, nudging him to follow his lead deeper into town, towards the small lake at the town's edge. Mage's name is David Khan et Kroinen, former Western minor noble, part of their enclave. He was exiled and made himself a cozy little home here, near the town, somewhere. Why was he exiled? I don't know for sure, Federik explained, but rumor has it that he kept one of the artifacts meant for processing. It likely cost the kingdom enough stones that they took extreme measures and ran him out. So why is he wanted? Is he hoarding artifacts now? Callahan asked while led through a narrow alley, through a few tall townhouses that gave way into the open street just across from the lake. He put together some men, mostly military deserters. They've been ambushing caravans just past the streams out of town. Only caravans marked for magical contents, mind you. Federik stopped Callahan and looked around the street. It was busy, people covering it on all sides. Some fishermen were still in their small boats, unloading the morning catch. Some seemed to be minor bureaucrats, scribbling away various notes in their ledgers. Most of them, however, were simply citizens of Inswink, out along the lake. Callahan waited patiently for his brother to get his bearings. So he has a man in town, that's who you're looking for? Federik nodded and started making his way through the crowd. Callahan followed, an easy enough task in a crowded place, as Federik stood at least an entire head taller than most. And when we find him, what's your plan, Federik? I'll ask him nicely to mark a caravan for us. We'll hide inside. When David's men ambush the transport, we'll come out and ambush them instead. Callahan shrugged at the simplicity of the plan. Though from experience he knew that simple plans rarely went well. What if David's men in town won't listen to your nicely worded request? Federik smiled wide and didn't answer. So you're going to beat the crap out of him? Pretty much, yes. The two of them came to a stop again, in the middle of a group of people arguing over the best type of fish to serve for supper. Federik spun around and stopped just a few paces back. His posture was as relaxed as always, and his face showed no thought behind it, as if he was simply out for a morning walk. So where is he? Callahan asked, growing impatient. Federik put on a wide grin, and without warning, he reached on his left and grabbed the man by the collar, knocking him to the ground forcefully. Dust rose up from the impact as Federik placed his knee on the man's chest, causing the air in his lungs to quickly come out in a loud blow. Rooney Dunwall, Federik yelled at the downed man. The two of us should have a talk. Before Callahan could make sense of the situation, a scrawny man in patched leathers came up to him and gently tapped him on the shoulder. He turned to look, a bit too late, as he only saw a fist heading straight for his face. The impact pushed him a few steps back, and he heard Federik's voice. Take care of these assholes while I discuss things over with my new friend here, he said, as he grabbed Rooney by the collar and propped him up. Callahan didn't hesitate to comply. The people around scattered, save for a few curious onlookers eager to witness the fistfight. Another punch came towards Callahan's face, now from a larger man to his left. He ducked just in time, spun in place, and put all of his weight in a single hit to the man's ribs, knocking him back. The scrawny man ran at him furious. The wanderer deflected the first blow, parried a low kick, but was taken to the ground by the large man. Hurt. Release. He could feel Morrigan's voice crawl against his mind. I have it under control, he thought back, urging the shadows to stay put. One punch connected with his nose. Blood rushed as he could feel the darkness inside swirl, ready to be released, yet he held. He pulled the large man close and headbutted him, enough to break his balance momentarily. He rolled away quickly, charged forward, and put his knee up. The man's jaw cracked under the impact as he fell to the ground. A small knife barely missed his neck. A step back makes a second blow miss, the scrawny man now swinging fast and wide. Morrigan pounded away against his will, begging for release. Callahan managed to grab the attacker's hand, twisted it in place, and the knife dropped. He kicked it away, pushed the man back, and charged. A fist landed on his chest. The air left his body, and the wanderer stumbled a few paces back, almost landing in the crowd's arms. But he managed to compose himself just in time. A perfectly timed block left the scrawny man now open. A jab to the face, a left hook. His opponent was getting tired. The wanderer grabbed his head and slammed it against his knee, sending him to the ground. Callahan was left standing, panting and with a bloody nose. He glanced over to Federik and could only hear Rooney's pleadings as his ears were still ringing. He went closer, slightly stumbling for balance. The shadows in his head circled, almost in excitement at the violence. More, it called out. Callahan ignored the darkness and closed his eyes, trying to catch his breath. Federik let the men go, and he immediately sprinted away from the two attackers. The crowd dispersed, most disappointed with the short display, and mumbling amongst themselves. Federik tightened his cape over his wide shoulders and looked at his guild brother, still panting heavily. "You're getting old, Cal," he said with the same warm smile. "Fuck you," Callahan answered, gasping for air. "So what's next? Another bout while you chat up someone else?" Federik placed his hand on Callahan's shoulder, the weight of it resting heavily on him. "Rooney said there's a caravan leaving shortly. He will mark it. We need to be on it." The two wanderers made their way back across town to the caravansary. Federik assured Callahan that together they would be able to handle the situation. He went on to list other sources for his information, mostly from the merchants whose transports were hit. No victims were reported, and those that witnessed the attacks described the mage's men as efficient and methodical. Why David didn't resort to violence, Federik was unsure, but he assumed rather confidently that his men were better at intimidation and coercion than actual fighting. He also believed that David was gathering every artifact he could find in order to distill it and sell it to pieces on the black market, a very lucrative business venture. Callahan expressed doubt about the mage's motivation. His brother put his worries aside, as he had taken note of the artifacts stolen. All minor trinkets, nothing actually dangerous. He also pointed out that the Tren haven't provided any major artifacts in decades, with anything of value being strictly regulated and never leaving Solaris. "What about the old ones?" Callahan asked. "Too few to be relevant, Cal," he quickly replied. "Besides the Bloodblade, when was the last time you just happened across something dangerous?" "Fair point," Callahan thought, trying to remember, but coming out with an empty mind. They reached the caravansary soon enough and spotted the marked transport. Callahan ran his fingers across a small chalk sign, two lines crossed diagonally by another. He pointed it out to his guild brother. "Is this the mark?" Federik paid little attention and simply nodded, confidently enough. Callahan slightly lifted the leather tarp covering the back of the caravan. A few boxes, a couple of empty baskets, nothing of real value inside. "It seems right," he gestured to Federik. "How do you want to do this?" Federik pulled himself up on the caravan and went under the leather, trying as best he could to make himself smaller. Callahan sighed, rolled his eyes, and joined him in the now cramped space. "I got a bad feeling, brother. This all seems too easy." Federik dismissed his concerns. He was confident in his plan, and he mentioned that it was so simple, few things could actually go wrong. It wasn't long until voices started to get closer and closer to the transport. The merchants running the caravan had arrived. Soon after, they were on the move. Callahan dropped his voice to a low whisper. "Aren't you worried that this mage maybe found a way to distill the effects of the artifacts he's taken into something dangerous?" Federik shook his head and looked at him. "No. If the Tren offer us a cloak able to heal, mages can pull its threads apart and craft healing potions from each of them. They can't make a fucking sword out of it, now can they?" Callahan scoffed. "Yes, I know how it works. I'm not an idiot. I was just..." "Shut up." Federik placed his hands in front of Callahan's face. "They're here," he whispered. Both of them could now hear mumblings outside the caravan. Then suddenly, swords being drawn. Callahan's body tensed up. The sounds of a short and brutal fight surrounded them. "You said they just robbed the caravans," he whispered to his guild brother. Federik squirmed around in the tight space and tried to make sense of the situation. And then the sound stopped. Complete quiet except for a set of footsteps approaching. Federik placed his hand on the hilt of his sword and nodded to his brother. Callahan shifted and got into position. The moment the leather tarp lifted slightly, Federik lunged forward. He burst out, knocking out one of the bandits to the ground immediately. Callahan followed, blade in hand, just in time to deflect a blow aimed at Federik's head. The other bandits charged. Federik ducked under a swing and ran his massive shoulder into the chest of a man, throwing him to the ground. He swung his blade wide, with force and intent, and caught the sides of another. Clean strike. He looked over to Callahan, struggling to push back a mace-yielding foe. He deflected the first blow, then a second, but the hilt of a sword caught his temple during a third. Callahan stumbled back, trying to regain his balance. The mace came barreling towards his chest, missed by an inch just as Federik pushed him to the side, out of harm's way. "Stop messing around, Cal," he yelled at him, kicking another bandit so hard he dropped his sword. He then charged towards the others. Callahan regained his senses and followed. He parried a blow, pivoted on his heel, and struck back. Clean cut across a bandit's chest. Another sword came for his head, deflected at the last moment, But his brother finished the job, running his blade through the man. His blade stuck, his grip loosened. Federik rolled away and jumped on an enemy, pummeling him into the ground. Callahan grabbed the small man by the collar, threw him to the ground, blocked 2 strikes of a spear, and rushed to help his guild brother. Just as he reached him, the only thing he heard was, "Stop fighting now." And they did. The remaining bandits and the 2 wanderers suddenly paused. They put their guards down, confused. "What's happening?" Federik asked in anger, his fist still raised high in the air. He looked around at the bandits, less than 10 men, all patiently waited alongside them. "Everyone stand up and place any and all equipped weapons on the ground," the voice rang again. And again, everyone followed precisely. Callahan threw his sword on the ground. He even reached behind his back, took out the small dagger he always kept hidden, and placed it near the sword. Federik looked around again, confused, as the attackers proceeded to do the same. From the front of the caravan, a man came. Draped in a matte black coat with dark hair, he fiddled with a ring between his fingers. Callahan heard Morrigan's voice from inside his head. "Release," she said in monotone. "Danger. Kill," she yelled. "No," he thought back quickly. The man approached Federik and looked him up and down. He then turned his attention towards Callahan. "Everyone except the 2 of you load all the weapons into the caravan and head towards the hideout. Dispose of the bodies on the way, safely." The wanderers watched the bandits follow orders exactly, every one of them. Even the one Callahan caught across the chest, stumbling for balance, bleeding and barely still alive, tried to obey. Yet he fell to the ground after a few steps, lifeless. "Shame," the man said, watching the scene. "Lucky for me, I've got you 2 now." The man circled the wanderers and commanded once again, "Come closer to me and listen to what I say." And the 2 of them obeyed without question. "What the fuck is going on, Cal?" Federik asked calmly, walking towards the man. "Do not speak unless I address you a question," the man commanded again, just as Callahan was about to open his mouth, yet the words failed to come out. "My name is David Khan et Kroinen. I've heard you were looking for me. Lucky for me, I've instructed my men in town to mark crates differently if there was trouble." He stepped closer to Federik and circled his large frame. "I've heard of you, Federik Jaspar. Quite the reputation follows you." The mage reached behind his back and unclasped a small satchel from his belt. He rubbed the ring in his other hand once more. "If you have any artifacts on you, place them into this satchel now." Federik looked at Callahan, his eyes struggling, but his hands relaxed and obedient. He took off his earring and placed it in David's satchel. Then he reached behind his back and took his stone pouch. He extended it forward and dropped it in as well. Callahan watched the gesture, confused. Federik averted his eyes from his brother. "What do the items you've placed here do, Federik?" the mage asked. Federik hesitated for a moment, trying desperately not to speak. A fleeting moment now passed. "The earring has a small rod in it. That's the magical part. It allows you to see in the dark. The pouch..." Federik paused and shook his head. "The pouch is enchanted. Whatever is in it never runs out, no matter how much you take." David looked at him and chuckled. He eyed the stone-filled pouch carefully. "So you keep your stones here then? Infinite wealth?" Federik nodded silently. Callahan watched his brother from a few paces away, feeling Morrigan's voice scraped against his will. "Liar!" she called out in his head. He struggled for a moment and managed to speak his own mind. "So you lied to me?" Callahan asked, furious. "You could have just helped me and it would have cost you nothing? Why even drag me into this, Federik?" Federik looked away and didn't answer. David stepped closer to him. "Do not speak unless I address you," the mage repeated his command, the ring in his hand giving off a light glow as the words left his mouth. Morrigan's voice rang in the wanderer's mind once again. "Immune, release, kill every artifact you have, wanderer, in the satchel now," the mage said. Callahan reached behind his neck and unlocked his necklace. He placed the amulet in the mage's satchel. He looked at it, thoroughly unimpressed by the design. "What does this amulet do?" he asked. Callahan struggled, feeling the shadow's will rush over him. He kept silent for a few seconds until he finally succumbed. "It takes you home." Callahan buried his head in his palms and the mage took a few steps back. Federik watched the scene worried. I told you not to move, the mage repeated. Callahan contorted, stuck between David's command and Morrigan's will. Name, she called out, scratching to be set free. No, Callahan yelled out loud. The shadows at his feet grew darker and larger. David watched the scene unfold, confused. He squeezed the ring tight in his fist. What are you hiding? He asked again. The mage looked towards Federik. Restrain him. Federik followed the command, grabbing Callahan from behind, squeezing him tight. Morrigan's voice rang inside his head. Free! Louder and louder. Kill, name, release, she kept screaming. Callahan resisted. The shadows at his feet twitching, going back and forth. Stay, he kept yelling. David took a step forward, confused but still curious. Tell me, what are you hiding? He commanded again, the ring now emitting a visible light, peeking through the mage's fingers. Callahan stopped resisting. He opened his eyes, black as burnt coal, and looked the mage straight on. Shadows crawled up his body as Federik's grip loosened. The bandits, still loading the caravan with the weapons and securing the bodies in place, seemed unbothered by the scene. David's eyes grew wide as a single word came out of the wanderer's mouth, not in his own voice, but something deeper and more terrifying. Mine. A dark shadow crept up from Callahan's hand and struck the mage before he could take another blink. He paused for a split second and looked down. His hand, the one holding the ring, laid severed on the ground at his feet, fingers still wrapped around the magical artifact. Just now his body cut up and blood slowly came out. Then more and more until David dropped to his knees, clutching his wound. Callahan felt his body go limp and his vision blurred, then went black. His eyes opened moments later, awakened by the sharp sounds of steel blades meeting next to his ear. He tried to make sense of the situation, but his head was spinning. Get, he heard briefly, as he felt his entire body dragged across the dirt road. Cal, he heard his name. Get up! The wanderer managed to come to his senses. He saw David, wailing in pain, cursing and giving orders. He looked up and saw Federik, his guild brother, face bloodied, one hand wrapped around his collar, pulling him away. His other hand was holding back two of the bandits, mindlessly charging towards them. Callahan shot up to his feet and tackled one of the men, bringing him down. Federik took advantage of the moment. He grabbed the other by the waist and threw him clear over his shoulder, landing with a loud crack. Federik extended a hand to his brother, pulled him up, looked him in the eyes and said a single word, barely audible from the shouting and the cursing. Run! And so they did, back towards the town as fast as they could. The only thing they could hear in the growing distance was David's curses, growing ever more faint. Commands now coming out half nonsense as the mage struggled in pain. Callahan managed to make out a promise through all of it. David Khan et Kroinen vowed to find them and enact painful retribution. In the chaotic escape, Callahan felt Morgan's presence stir violently, still pleading for release so that she may end it. He resisted. He did realize, however, that the man they left behind now held all of the resources he needed to find him, to find Morrigan. He could not allow that, but for the time being, he just kept running.